Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I'm going to explain why conformity destroys the potential to utilize creativity in a constructive manner. And the reason for this, there's many reasons. One of which, if you understand the filtering of the mind, how we filter information on a daily basis, you could imagine like a range from 0 to 1. So where your filter is, it's like an intermediate, just like when you're uh, filtering when you're cooking and you're filtering could be milk, getting like rid of the fat potentially, anything that can filter uh, a proportion of the product. So essentially, with the mind, you're filtering the proportion of the bits, and it's going to reside between 0 and 100%. If you have filtering, you're not going to hit 100%. If you have no filtering, it's going to be complete chaos. You're just going to blurt out whatever's on your mind. And some people have issues with filtering, and there's disorders like ADHD, which is a problem with impulse control that creates a lack of ability to filter the mind. It's low lane inhibition, which is essentially contributes to the inability to compartmentalize novel bits of information into the mind, and actually, uh, by doing so, you don't get that dampening effect over time. So, for someone with low lane inhibition, when they encounter an event that has been previously encountered, they still take in all the individual details that someone else would naturally suppress. And because of that, they're bombarded with more stimuli, which implies it's harder for them to filter because it may cause more excitement or invoke some more excitability or just creativity. It not necessarily makes them more creative, but anytime you have more information to work with, you can have more potential to be creative in that way. But also, you have more people with low lane inhibition that are more prone to physiological stress, physiological decay, mental illness, psychosis, anything. Because essentially, if you cannot, there's a fine line between creativity and or constructive creativity and destructive. The way I think of destructive, I kind of making this up, but you could think of it like the ability to organize the chaos. Because with creativity, you have to be comfortable with going into the realms or the domain where you're going into a new environment or new situation, or you're imagining new things, new ideas. It's chaotic at first, but you have to be able to organize it. And if you can't do so, it becomes destructive, and that's where like you get into psychosis. It becomes very incoherent. It's very and it's hard for the mind to organize in that state. It's more disorganized mesh. But what I mean by like conformity relates to the filtering of the mind. For instance, if you conforming to a trend or something that's going on, and you kind of consider, you're very self-conscious of how people may perceive you, or even your creative ideas. If you become like so self-conscious, it's going to disrupt the filtering process and lower the proportion, or increase the proportion of filtering, but lower. So if you think of like 0 to 1, 1 being 100% filtering, 0 being 0% filtering. Well, with the conformity or when you're so self-conscious, you're going to actually converge to 1. Not, you may not hit 1, but you're gonna, and then therefore you're not gonna have as much information. Well, just like I mentioned with low lane inhibition, you're not gonna have as much in your repository to work with, because whatever, now you're closing off a huge subset of the population. The population is whatever you can utilize, all the bits of information. Consider a population that you soak in a lifetime. As the population grows, you can radially project more ideas. If you only have one bit of information and there's no connection, it's discrete. It's very hard to, you know, diverge from that point. You need reference points, and therefore, when you have like in billiards, you have an idea, and it hits another idea, it builds momentum. You don't know, depending on the energy, it creates a distinct. Of course, it's not going to be exactly like the physics, the physical, it's not going to follow the physical laws essentially that we in relation to the game of billiards, but using that construct, you can understand that like once you have a reference point and you build momentum, you can project more ideas. So it starts with all these reference points and all the links and the chains between the connections between all these bits. And when you're destroying that, by like when you filter and you're kind of cutting that off, of course you're going to destroy or disrupt creativity. You're not going to put out there your ideas because you may be, you could be afraid of, if you're afraid of how people are going to perceive, if you don't think it's going to be worthwhile. And ultimately, the key, and this is why people who are creative tend to be on the unconventional side. Like with Tesla, he made huge projections, well beyond the bounds of reality that he was everything encompassed like within his reality and everyone else's reality at the time. He made a projection, and some people maybe thought he was crazy. And why? Because the distance between the projection was well beyond what seemed feasible at the time. But Tesla, he didn't care. He went with it. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed the process. He basically lived for it. It gave him reward feedback. And if he did care so much, and he was so worried and conformed to the world and what needs to be done and this and that, and relies so heavily on books and trends and people who do it this way or this way, and you're focusing on the methodology, the conventions. Well, you're compressing the creativity, you're limiting it, you're it's like you're throwing it away, and that's kind of why creative people are divergent. They diverge from the conventional ways. Generally, you don't want to go too crazy. Of course, you don't want to go to psychosis. That's not, but because essentially physiological stress. I think a lot of times with psychosis, how it begins is, of course, drugs and alcohol catalyze it because you're creating. The way I view it is I was interested in if everyone I'm sure a lot of you know of Bobby Fischer, who was a great chess player, but very creative, and kind of he fell into the throes of some delusions later on in his life, or he basically his mind kind of deteriorated, which is typical when you age. So what was interesting with Bobby Fischer is whether this is that during his tournaments he was very sensitive to the noise around him, lights. He had sensitivity. He was also exceptionally brilliant, and of course maybe potentially had low latent inhibition. And I was thinking about this one time, and I was wondering. I was like, what if you're bombarded with so much information, but you're able to co- collect it together, organize it, just like the planets in our solar system. There's a conglomerate. It started with chaos, but ordering took place. Just the same process happens in the mind. The atom has, an affinity, these forces. We have the forces linked with the connections between the synapse and the neurons are all connected, which kind of create the connection, create the organization of our mind. And when you break the connections, it creates a lot of havoc. And I just think with Bobby Fischer's case is he had a lot of stimuli and potentially created physiological decay or stress. And when you add age to the equation, I was thinking there must be a limit where the mind decays over time, so you're not able to organize like you were. But what if you're still pulling in so much information, but your ability to organize goes down and down and down? Potentially because you're already have the chaotic, there's chaos, which is a lot more bits of information, more entropy, and if your organization goes down low enough, it passes the threshold where eventually you run into delusions, or in usually these cases happen with anxiety. Well, it's interesting because anxiety is what interests me about anxiety, because I've had periods of some. At one point in my life, I thought my roommate was going to kill me and poison. Or I think something about poisoning food, and I thought people were stealing from me and all these signs, and my mind was like racing, but I was also seeing shadows at night. I was having hypnagogic hallucinations. My mind was just going very fast at that time. Of course, anxiety was, amplifying things. But it was interesting because, well, I also had reasons. The reason I was so anxious is because I'm kind of, I guess it was me being a hypochondriac too as well. My friend was taking Xanax and a host of other um medications, and of course it affected his behavior. And I kind of I looked online, and it kind of clicked to me one time. I'm like, I wonder what the homicide rate is for people who use Xanax. To me, in my mind, I'm like, it probably must be higher. And what the reason I thought this is, like, when I was with my friend who was taking so much Xanax, he would forget who I not he would forget, like, one time we were going to play billiards. He gets out of the passenger's side, and I'm of course driving, and he tells me, "Where are my keys?" And he was thinking like that he was driving. Like it was like 15 seconds, 30 seconds later. And he's like, "Where are we?" And I was like, I was wondering. I was like, because we went over this like a few minutes ago. And then I came, made, was mentioning how Xanax destroys the memory. And it kind of makes you, it's like you have Alzheimer's, a temporary state of Alzheimer's. And that freaked me out because I was like, okay, we have this. Okay, if I and he has some irritability. He was having some agitation, irritability, yelling at people, and I'm like, oh crap. I'm like, oh, like he may forget like who I am, like if I'm a friend, and then just kill me. So I look online, and it says there's a huge increase in homicides rate, or huge increased homicide rate among people who take Xanax. And I'm like, oh fuck, I'm screwed. And so in my mind, I'm just working this up, and like, oh man, it just escalate. But the thing is when anxiety takes place and your mind's going at a faster state of processing, you're pulling in more bits of information, you're more alert, you notice more things, and that can create. There's, I guess, maybe some limits where you fall into the trap. You fall into the trap, and it's too much maybe to withstand. And of course, at that time, I had some reasons. Those are my main reasons. But there was some irrationality behind it. Of course, I kind of got worked up myself way too much to manage my life at that time. So I kind of had to get out of that situation to kind of mitigate everything. But in terms of Bobby Fischer's case, it's almost similar. You're but he always had that level, like, and of course if there's any form of anxiety and pushes even higher and your organization power decreases, your ability to organize, this is what creates the potential for psychosis behavior. It's and essentially it's being open. It's being open to this information, not closing anything off. And what conformity does, it's the same thing. It closes things off, because if you follow if you imagine you follow just the wherever people sway, you go in this direction. If they sway, you go in that direction. Well, then the reason that, like, of course, is going to destroy the creativity, because creativity it's a divergence from what is known. So if you follow what is known, conform to what is known, you start eliminating creativity. Not You don't destroy it completely. I'm saying is there's a fine line also you have to take. There has to be some balance. You don't want to just be so divergent that you're you know incoherent, or you're going kind of in that direction. But that usually is instigated by lack of organization. So generally with creativity, I think of it as an adaptation process as well. If you're naturally creative, um, and you enjoy doing it, it feeds the brain, it feeds the mind. If you're a creative individual and you destroy it, it's like you're dying. You're slowly decaying and dying over time. That's how I think of it. And therefore, like, that's why any form, anytime you start becoming self-conscious and maybe put so much emphasis on how people or perceive, or basically have so much expectation of where you need to go and where your creativity needs to take you, these kind of problems, this is kind of, to me, partly part of the piece of the pie, or a piece of the pie, as to why creative individuals may fall into the traps, or may uh, develop some physiological or psychological or psychiatric illness or mental illness. It can kind of take on that form because of the stress that is created by, you know, the expectations, or, any form of uh, conformity, or, you have to kind of let loose. You don't want to converge, because that is a form of convergence. If we think of creativity as a divergence, um, you got to be free with the creativity, not not be imprisoned, or create the. What I mean by that is, like, you're creating the torture, because there's a lot of creative individuals who, like Vincent Van Gogh, who was extremely creative genius, but part of his problem, of course, drinking heavily, and he went into a lot of mental problems, which maybe led to the drinking habits, as a way to kind of cope. But he didn't get appreciated much in his time, and that's one area that, I think creative individuals may uh, try to. They may even take more prone to take drugs and alcohol to kind of get the reward that they're missing, because I think in general everyone wants some form of validation, depending on what it is, to a degree. And creative individuals, it can put a lot of physiological stress, and that's why I think leads to a lot of those problems. But at the same time, being a creative individual, uh, it's always good to, you know share the ideas. Don't think you're going to be um, so, or criticized, or being stupid, or this or that, because at the end of the day, we're all, we all make stupid mistakes. I mean, we you could laugh at you. I could laugh at myself for so many stupid things I've done. I mean, one time, me being I am very absent-minded. I literally had my keys on my stove and I was cooking something, and then an explosion went off. It turns off I melted my keychain, or not of course the metal part, but the plastic part. Uh-huh. And one time I was making tea, and then it took me a while to notice, the smoke. Turns out I microwaved it without water, so I burnt the whole, uh, the tea bag. Totally burnt it. I was oblivious. I had one time where I'm grabbing pizza from my oven. Instead of using you know, a glove, which I didn't even have, I used my shirt. In fact, I didn't realize I used two shirts. So what ended up happening, and I went upstairs afterwards until my fire alarm went off. Turns out my other shirt that I didn't realize was in my hand was burning an oven. Total obliviousness. I mean, and this is this lack of common sense and just being, But I just think you have to live life not caring as much, because the more you do, or if you let these things affect you in the future, it's actually affecting health. Mental, physical decay. It may not affect you now, but it lags. Just like any cycle. If you go through stress, the aftermath is not over when the stress ends. The aftermath is could be potentiated in the future, and you could reach a point when your organs, everything, starts collapsing. Your mind, you start going into this depression that happens even at a later period, and that happened to me when I went through anxiety, and I came to that realization how there's like a cyclic effect and a lag. Just like, with anything, there's cycles, there's trends. People, will follow in this trend or that trend, and so forth. But to really let creativity foster, you got to kind of. It's not that you're taking. To me, it's interesting because you could think you take a unique path, which technically it's not really, to me, unique, because whatever comes out of your mind started somewhere that wasn't in your mind. So what I mean by that is, of course, you have to collect. It's a collection, a collective consciousness, or just you have to collect bits of information. You have to collect something, and whatever you collect is from something that's been created. In the beginning, the Earth was created, right? So we had to collect information from what it, the nature, and therefore created our ideas. So it started with nature. It started with what has already been created, but that was created somewhere, and it starts in the very beginning, that of individual subatomic particles. So yeah, I mean it's a chain. I like to think of it as a chain, and it's an influential factor of which path we take. So that's kind of why I believe, like with creativity, originality can't be 100% original. And yeah, I know I went on a ramble, but I'm gonna stop right here, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.